Hello friends, today's video is about something I've been meaning to talk about for a very long time because it's something I'm very passionate about, and if you are interested in philosophy on any level, I think that this message should be very important to you, something that you should really think about. What I'm talking about today is metaphysics. What I want to start off by saying is that there's a lot of thinking to do on this. Obviously, there's been a lot of books written about this sort of stuff. And so in no way am I going to be able to comprehensively or accurately discuss these topics in such a short video. And so I want to explain them as best I can, but I don't want to make it seem like this is some sort of comprehensive thing. I want to especially make this video, if you're very seasoned in the realm of metaphysics, then you might not get a lot from this. You probably already agree with me, and you might be like, what are you even talking about? But unfortunately, there are a lot of people, even philosophers, I find a lot of people who are interested in philosophy, who will go around and either just have no knowledge of metaphysics at all, or they will go further and say, actually, metaphysics is quote-unquote useless, or something like that. That it has no applications the way that ethics or whatever else has. It's just a bunch of, navel gazing or whatever. And I find this to be kind of offensive and very inaccurate. And I want to kind of set the record straight here and explain how metaphysics is actually one of the most core principles of any philosophical thought and can lead us to a lot of very, very real and interesting conclusions about the world that are in fact useful. The first thing to understand about metaphysics here is that there's really no philosophy that doesn't also involve some level of metaphysics, right? Metaphysics is kind of the foundation to anything else that you want to do or say about the world, right? And so to say that thinking about metaphysics is useless is just completely false, because I'm sure that you have done metaphysics and you might just not call it metaphysics. Even in our everyday lives, something like these metaphysical questions spring up. A great example would be something like the existence of God, which is certainly a metaphysical question. And I don't think anyone could argue that that's not a very important question. Other big questions might include, do we have free will? Or, what's the nature of personal identity, right? That's one of my favorite ones. These are 100% metaphysical questions, and they definitely have major applications. We do live our lives by certain metaphysical assertions, and there's really no way around that. And so you have to engage with metaphysics as a philosopher, and might I say, just as a human being. Now, the reason why metaphysics connects very importantly with my own philosophy is the idea of ontological nihilism. Now, if you haven't heard of ontological nihilism, I would definitely suggest to go watch Vsauce's video. I think it's called Do Chairs Exist? Or something along those lines. Absolutely fantastic video, and he's going to give you a much better explanation than I will be able to here. But I'm going to take it from a more kind of traditional philosophy perspective. And now, where I believe that the idea kind of ontological nihilism started is with David Hume, who in this very interesting book, Treatise on Human Nature, goes over the idea that, which we would call skepticism, which is essentially that we can't know that anything exists at all. And everything that we see and interact with, everything that we know about the universe, all of our epistemological assertions are really only just perceptions, fabrications of the mind. And importantly, we can never go beyond those perceptions because we always exist as subjective beings, right? Probably my favorite little passage from Hume is when he says, quote, "'Tis impossible for us so much as to conceive or form an idea of anything specifically different from ideas and impressions. Let us fix our attention out of ourselves as much as possible. Let us chase our imagination to the heavens, or to the utmost limits of the universe. We never really advance a step beyond ourselves, nor can conceive any kind of existence but those perceptions which have appeared in that narrow compass. This is the universe of the imagination, nor have we any idea but what is there produced. And so now you can begin to understand how the world can be understood as more of just a collection of perceptions that we give order and structure to, and not necessarily a collection of concrete objects that exist beyond us, right? A lot of things that we just assume about the world are really just assumptions that we make that don't actually have any concrete proof, that we can't actually point to. One of his biggest examples is like causation, right? We only know causation because we just experience it. We can just see that one thing leads to another thing. But can we actually explain how or why things lead to other things? Because Hume points out that we can't actually do that. And so the question that arises out of Hume is really, what is an object without human perception? How do we understand that? Now, another example I would use to illustrate the sort of illusory nature of our understanding of the external world, also an example that Vsauce uses in his video, but it's just too good not to use, is the ship of Theseus, right? Essentially, you have a ship, and over time, you slowly replace the parts of the ship with new parts, until after a very long time, you've replaced all of the parts of the original ship with new parts, right? And so the question is this the same ship as before, even though it's made of entirely different matter, right? And the parallel with this as well is just the human body, which is constantly regenerating itself. Cells are dying and regenerating, and so when it comes to humans, we really aren't made up of the same matter throughout our entire lives. That's one parallel you can make with the ship of Theseus. But really, what this breaks down for us is the idea that any object is just sort of this concrete thing that exists outside of our own perceptions. Because I think that anyone would say, obviously people argue otherwise, I happen to think they're wrong. I think that the real answer to the ship of Theseus is that obviously the ship is the same ship. We understand it as the same ship, right? Even though it is made of completely different matter, because our understanding of objects is entirely within our minds. It's entirely socially constructed and not something that physically, concretely exists in the world, and that goes for everything that we see and experience. And that idea that nothing truly exists outside of the human mind is what we would call ontological nihilism. This does start to open up a lot of very big and a lot of very important questions about more than just what things are in the world, but about who we are, right? Where do we find the I that we call I, the self, right? Because as much as you try to look, there doesn't actually appear to be an I, to be a subject behind the perceptions. Hume especially was getting at this idea that it's not that there's an I, an ego, behind all the perceptions that is perceiving the perceptions, but that even our concept of ourselves is a part of the perceptions, right? Just the perceptions that are experienced, right? I'm trying not to use personal pronouns because it's difficult to conceptualize. And now you might still be a little lost here, perhaps. You might be like, well, that just sounds like a bunch of, how is that supposed to have any practical applications? But I think that a very big, very important application of this is that in coming to understand this truth about ourselves, this truth that there really isn't a self, we start to understand that there is no such thing as this ego that we attach so much of our happiness to, so much of our livelihoods to. This truth is almost the first stepping stone to actually escaping the ego, and to achieve what some might call something like an ego death. I think that you find that being paralleled in, all types of ethical, moral philosophies and just general ideas about what it means to be happy and how to become happy. We have to escape our ego. We have to escape our desires. We have to escape our assumptions about the world, about what is good and what is bad, and what exists and what doesn't exist. And so I think all of that is built upon the foundation of what Hume started and what eventually came this kind of ontological nihilism, which I think you find everywhere, really. It can be a scary and kind of unpleasant concept to a lot of people, something that they really want to reject. They really want to assert that, no, things must exist, right? That kind of thing. And I'm not going to be trying to disprove all of those arguments today. But what I do want to get people to understand is that this really is a very freeing concept. It's not meant to be, or you can read it in a lot of different ways. And I think that the better, beneficial way to read it is as letting us step outside of all of the assumptions that we make about how the world functions. Because when we understand that most of it is all just in our heads, it really opens up a lot of potentials for life, for everything, right? And so I hope that through all of that I've explained, you can come to understand how when we think about metaphysics, that has a lot of very profound implications for, everything about life, about how one must personally live their life. I hope that more people don't just disregard it. All roads kind of lead back to metaphysics in a lot of ways. Metaphysics is very essential to the project of the existentialists, which I talk a lot about on this channel, particularly someone like Kierkegaard. His idea of embracing the subjectiveness of our being, and that, again, goes in line with all of the stuff that I've already mentioned in this video. But he specifically points out sort of something Hume was getting at, where we can't really ever go beyond ourselves. We are always stuck as subjective beings, and yet we are always striving to, let's say, relate to the objective truth of reality, something objective beyond ourselves. We are always trying to reach something beyond ourselves, be that a moral or ethical principle, be that just some sort of external desire, something that we just want to fulfill, something like that, what you might call truth, right? We're always striving for this as humans, but Kierkegaard points out that this is, in fact, kind of a foolish thing, because we can never achieve that. We will always be stuck within our subjective existence. And for Kierkegaard, this leads him to a lot of very interesting ethical conclusions that he makes about how we should live our life. For Kierkegaard, that's through faith, through a subjective relation to the world, through an embrace of our ever-changing, ever-evolving experience, right, that lies very much outside of the objective. I also think that this existentialist kind of idea of things has a lot of very important political implications. And so, right, you have those ethical implications of what Kierkegaard is doing with the metaphysics, and then you have big political implications with what you can do with metaphysics. And where that leads us to is that the social and political order that we live under comes with and reinforces a certain set of metaphysical relations between individuals and the world around them. Objective, sort of external forces and external phenomenon, objects, right? Be they power structures, be they particular ideas. What's important to understand is that the world that we live under right now is very much a world of trying to do what Kierkegaard says is foolish, what is impossible, which is trying to relate the subjective personal being to something external and objective. Because in our world, your life is not defined by your experience of the world, but it is always defined by external things. Your property, your criminal history, your economic status, your occupation, stuff like that, right? And so you, as a being within our society, you are literally being objectified. And what happens is that people start to become alienated from themselves, which is something that Marx gets into, where they don't come to understand themselves through their personal experience, their personal vitality, but only through these external constructions of power and of society. And this has a lot of implications, again, about what we should do politically, how we should change the systems that we live under. All of this stuff all comes from that foundation of metaphysics. So, okay, if I haven't made my point clear by now, that's, I hope that you come to understand that. So, yeah, if you're new to metaphysics, I really hope you stuck around, and I really hope you got something out of this video. And if you're not new to metaphysics, I still hope you enjoyed it. So, yeah, that's going to do it for my thoughts, and I will see you in the next one.